Hey there. So, do you know what today is? Today marks the 6-month anniversary of my uploading my first video, which is probably something you weren't aware of. That is understandable, obviously, but it's kind of a big deal for me. It came a lot faster than I was expecting, and I thought, given this date, that I would take a moment at the beginning of this video to thank all of you guys who have wrapped me up into this community, taken the time to watch my content, sometimes to comment, sometimes to shoot me a note or ask me a question. It has been incredibly gratifying and heartwarming to have received the welcome that I have and to get to watch the number of people who swing by my channel grow. Because as far as metrics of success go, that's pretty much what you've got when it comes to YouTube. The number of people watching your content and the number of people subscribing. And I couldn't be happier that I have managed to provide you guys with something that you deemed worthwhile, something that made you want to come back and see more. And genuinely, I really hope that I managed to maintain whatever it is that brought you here to begin with and made you stay. And so after these 6 months and 40 videos later, as part of this thank you, I'm going to offer a gift, one of these oh-so-popular giveaways. But I'm going to get back to that later because first, there's a tool I need to introduce you to. And I want to take a little bit of time to discuss the concept of developing one's own divinatory tool. As many of you will likely know, I am a big fan of the tarot. But the concept of throwing lots or fuse has always appealed to me. I've made my very own set of Ogham fuse, which I have used, although never habitually. And clearly I'm not alone in appreciating that particular form of divination. It is quite possibly the most popular divinatory mechanic in the world. I can think of examples from most continents, including several that remain incredibly popular occult tools and ones that have become pervasive in the craft community. These would include throwing bones, the Ogham obviously, runes, ever popular. And there is something really lovely about employing traditional tools. For some, the long history itself is romantic and confers authority to the tool. As the population of people who employ a tool increases, so too do the odds of being able to find interesting reading material about that tool. In-depth and novel analyses of what different aspects of that tool represent. New and exciting ways to employ that tool. A lot of the work is done for you. And I don't mean that at all in a disparaging sense. This is a great strength. And, if we had to reinvent the wheel every single time we wanted to do something, everything would be very slow going. I believe in standing on the shoulders of giants. In some cases, a major benefit that is not always the first that springs to mind is that with these systems that have been optimized over many centuries, that time has managed to work out a lot of the kinks, a lot of the drawbacks. Areas where a tool may have been weaker at first can become stronger through modification that ends up being adopted in a widespread manner. And this particular aspect of any sort of divinatory tool, in particular ones that are supposed to deliver a level of narrative and provide a nuanced read. The difference between a tool that can do that and a tool that can't is, I think, first and foremost, one that can't be overly biased toward one theme or one tone, nor toward providing a particular constellation of advice. But all these perks notwithstanding, none of us are limited to working with tools that already exist. all of us can borrow, modify, and personalize in order to create something new, something that speaks to us and our practice, that incorporates aspects of our model or views. And so what I'm showing you today is an example of exactly that. It's a system I call the lots and chains. And the reason for this may be apparent already, but will certainly become so in just a little bit. Now, if you're going to develop your own divinatory tool, the easiest way to get going is to rip off a system that already exists. Now, I'm not talking generally speaking about something like lots, throwing pieces and interpreting the message based on how they fall. Yes, that is a mechanic that you can borrow, but it's so ubiquitous, I'm not even speaking of that. I mean that you can model the interpretation system on another divinatory system with which you are familiar to get you going, to make the transition easier, and to provide you with a level of depth that is already extant in what it is you're good at. And so in this case, what I have done is I've incorporated the major arcana from the tarot into my lot system, along with views that represent each of the court hierarchy, or rather that represent what to me is a central message of the pages and the queens, etc. But starting from this base, I knew that there were certain other aspects to this system that I specifically wanted to incorporate because I wanted the system to read a particular way. I wanted to be able to differentiate between particular things, and so I took that into consideration when designing this system. Now, I had been thinking about what it is I wanted to do and make of this system for a little while, but it didn't really click into place for me until I actually saw somebody else's video on casting charms. It was actually Kelly from A Truth in Story. She had a charm casting video, which I take it has become quite a popular form of divination, not one that I had previously been familiar with. And of course, that level of individualization is really what I'm talking about here. I'll link her video in the description so you can pop by and take a look, because that is a very accessible means of basically getting going with the same thing, although it lacks one of the mechanics that I wanted to incorporate and therefore was not quite what I was looking for. Now, getting going with this sort of process is easy. It's a matter of imagination and a little bit of thought and planning. Simply drawing out the ideas and the definitions for these different lots. I have no idea if you can see this. This is all done in pencil, so it may be a little tough to see. But quite simply, I brainstormed, drew out my ideas, got myself a bunch of little wooden rounds. So you can do this simply by sectioning a branch into many pieces, but you can also buy pre-sectioned wood like this. And then used my wood burner to burn the symbols onto these rounds of wood, and where necessary for the mechanic, added chain. Hence, lots and chains. So this piece, first off, denotes querent and question. I wanted to be able to have not merely one piece associated with the querent, but two, so that I could get sort of general information centered around this part, and then the question itself. But I also really wanted to focus on this idea of proximity as a key mechanic. Now, that is very common with lots, right? Often what you're looking at is groupings and the proximity of pieces to one another in order to determine meaning. Each of these groupings can almost be read as if they are their own tarot spread, with modifiers, trends, and influences. But in binding these together, I can also look at the path from one to the other and use confirmation of the chain itself in determining meaning. And there are several lots that are tied with chains. So as I mentioned, we have majors represented here as well. Among these, the Wheel of Fortune. I tend to interpret the wheel with a very heavy focus on the question of chance and fate, okay? So it seemed only reasonable to me to bind the wheel to a marker denoting chance and fate. And thus far, I've really enjoyed doing this. I've actually, in a read for a friend of mine, already had the experience where the wheel landed with this lot upright, so that in fact it was neither. It was quite fun. If I've got the photo, I'll drop it into the video right here. Also, the Devil card. I think it's a lot of people's favorite in some ways and really speaks to me of the concept of being shackled, of being chained, of being bound to concepts or patterns or people, what have you. And so with the Devil, I wanted to incorporate a chain itself so that in reading this, I could get a sense of what the Devil itself was being chained to. So when in an upright conformation like this, not all of the lots are single-sided, but many of them are. When in this sort of position, the connection of this chain to another chain can be read as providing information about what specifically the nature of the shackle is. And I've just noticed that a bunch of this is off camera, so let's move this here. Sorry, this won't be my most polished video. It's been a long day, and there is currently wine involved. We are, you and I, simply shooting the shit, so bear with me. Cheers. Now, this lot is Hecate's lot, and she was, of course, a key inspiration for a great deal of this. And with her, what I was looking for was an opportunity to suggest a place of crossroads, a bifurcation wherein the nature of what I was examining could be changed based on a decision that led the querent in a new direction. And so we have Hecate's lot, which is then bound to this lot, this fork, which will point me in the direction of where this bifurcation occurs, what it leads to. So what that unexpected other option is. Finally, last but not least of the bound lots is this trio: past, present, and future. And with this combination of lots and chains, I can both determine what the focus of the readings / groupings nearby is from a temporal standpoint. And also, it helps chart a trajectory through time rather than merely through tone, theme, or space in the read. Now here's something else I did. I used elemental symbols, but in fact I have 2 of each element. And the reason for that is I wanted something that would clearly differentiate between external elementally themed concepts like work for earth, emotion for water, romantic relationships for fire, versus the internal, spiritually focused elemental considerations, like the execution of one's practice for earth, intuition and the deeper well for water, potency and spellcraft for fire. I also included numerological lots. So rather than having aces through 10s for every suit, what I wanted was a simple 1 through 10, where a pure numerological association could then be applied to any other lot, including majors. Now with tarot, you have this perk of being able to read with reversals if you so desire. And one of the great pitfalls, I think, of a great many divinatory systems that aren't given sufficient thought and beta testing is that it becomes very easy to interpret a lot of it as happy-go-lucky, nothing dark ever. That doesn't have to be the case, but it can quite certainly be a tendency. And so I also incorporated several of these. These are merely markers denoting that the nearest lot or configuration, if it's lots one atop the other, should be interpreted as the shadow aspect of that lot. And therefore, within this system, I can readily differentiate shadow and light side in a manner that doesn't rely exclusively upon intuition. Finally, of the major players is this, the horizon. The distance between this piece and both the question and the querent informs the extent to which, the limit at which, the lots that surround these pieces are relevant and dependable. Beyond the horizon, everything is fuzzy, so it helps to focus the read upon this distance of relevancy, okay? And provides a means of determining what the distance of relevancy is without depending upon the density of the tiles or lots nearby. So it's entirely possible to cast this and only end up with a couple of lots within the realm of relevancy. The other thing is that depending on where the horizon falls and how far apart these pieces are, the realm of relevancy between these two things, the individual in general and the question that they are interested in, may overlap substantially or barely at all. Now, a few things worth noting if you're interested in doing something like this yourself. One is that it's important not to become discouraged. Sometimes things really won't work. And I don't think that that's a message that, you shouldn't be engaging in this sort of risque divination, but rather that you've still got kinks to work out. At the risk of drawing a comparison that some won't like, to a certain extent you have to treat the development of a divinatory system like designing a game. In that, in your development, you need to consider all the ways you can break the game. All the ways in which the conclusion may become foregone. How often do you get the same result again and again? Because if it's consistent, it's a problem. Divination relies, no matter its form, upon there being equal probability opportunity for different answers. If the system you have developed slants answers in one direction or another, you will have a problem. Now, to get you going in this kind of line of thinking, a good non-witchy resource is actually to check out information boards and websites that are focused on the game designing community. I'm not talking video games here, although you can probably find information that's valuable there as well. I'm speaking specifically about people who design board games. Because although the ultimate goals may be different, both of you are designing in an effort to ensure that every option available to the person experiencing the system remains open to them and is not improbably difficult to achieve. I'd also like to point out that just because something doesn't work doesn't necessarily mean that you have to change the entire system. It may simply mean that you have to be clever about the way you package it. So let me provide an example from exactly this, my lots and chains. The natural state of any chain is to become massively tangled with any other chain that is nearby. Anybody who owns jewelry and has shoved multiple necklaces in the same box has no doubt experienced this phenomenon. You can literally lay the chains side by side tidily, shut the drawer as softly as you please, and come morning, at least two of them will be intertwined. I legit think there was actually a paper published about the topic of chains erring toward the state of tangledness. Anyways, the point remains. If you just shove a bunch of chains together in a bag, they're going to become a tangled mess. And what will happen is when you try and cast the lots, the same sets of chains will always be entwined with one another. And so, without fail, your wheel of fortune will be wrapped somehow around your morai, your past, present, future, Hecate will be bound up in there somewhere too, and it'll just end up being a gods be damned mess that will slant your reading in a direction that is unintended and meaningless. Because if you know something is always going to come out a certain way, it ceases to be useful as a predictive or exploratory tool. But the answer to my little problem here with these chains was never to get rid of the chains. Instead, it was to be smart about how I designed the bag. Here is my little bag, pretty simple looking, except that it's got multiple compartments. And so all I do is place the chains that tend to become tangled, which are time in one side, Hecate in the other. Because the devil is a fairly short and tied to itself chain, I tend not to have as many issues with this. That goes in here, the middle, along with all the other lots, including the wheel. And when it comes to transportation, in fact, what I used to seal this, as you noted in the beginning, was the Quarantine question chain, which gets wrapped around to seal this. Now, when it comes to actually executing a reading, what I have been doing, and which has been working quite nicely, is, so I'm the only one who's handled these thus far, but at some point a real live present querent would do this in my stead, but hold each of these in one hand, focus on the querent, focus on the question. Once I have essentially assigned these lots to an individual, I throw both of them up into the air and let them fall as they may. And then I shake this and let these lots fall. So that, my dears, is the lots and chains. And although I'm still beta testing, thus far I'm really enjoying it as a method. It's a lot of fun, a little more expansive than most tarot spreads that I throw. And so in honor of this 6-month anniversary and 40 videos, what I'm offering is this. Any of my subscribers who are interested can post a comment in order to enter a random draw to get a detailed lots and chains read from me for free, of course. How this would work would be either a conversation beforehand or a letter where you tell me a bit about yourself, about what you're interested in asking, and then I would throw the lots and prepare for you either a video that I can upload privately for you to watch, or a write-up with pictures detailing my interpretation of the throw. And in this way, you will be at once helping me beta test my new divinatory tool and get some fun, novel insight into a question you have. So once again, that's anybody who is subscribed and who comments will be entered into the draw, and I will randomly select an individual in 1 week from the date of posting, and then get in touch with you and we'll sort this out. But for now, I'll let you go. And once again, to all of you, thank you so much for making this such a fun adventure for me. And I wish you the most wonderful night.